Climate and sustainability. So first of all, it's based on pseudoscience. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll expose some of this pseudoscience. I'll give you everything you need to know to realize that the theory is incorrect. The goal is, of course, total global control, just like the goal of the education system is total global control. And then here is a gentleman, Trofim Lysenko. I always bring him up when I talk about climate because this is what this reminds me of. He was a Soviet so-called scientist, and he had this quack theory on genetics that Stalin really liked. And Stalin decreed that that was the truth and nobody could challenge it. And they threw people in the gulags for saying that the theory was quackery. And you know, in the end, the truth still did come out. So I think we can take encouragement from that. But it was a dark time to be in the Soviet Union if you realized that this theory was ridiculous. And unfortunately, there are a lot of parallels between what we call Lysenkoism today and what's happening with the so-called global warming debate. So a lot of you probably remember the global cooling agenda, right? Just not that long ago, actually. From the 60s through all the way to the early 80s, it was the global cooling phenomenon. We were all going to freeze to death, and the crops were going to stop growing because it was going to be so cold. And Newsweek, right? And Newsweek was not alone. There was all kinds, so I don't pick on Newsweek just to pick on them. But you know, all the big publications were talking about this. They had an article, The Cooling World, and they said man-made global cooling is going to cause famine, and climatologists are pessimistic that the government is going to do anything to fix it, right? Where have we heard that before? They had some really interesting solutions for how we should deal with this. One of them was melting the Arctic ice cap by covering it with black soot. Really, Al Gore would have a heart attack, right? Because he keeps saying it's going to go away, and you know, it's still there. And they cited all kinds of impressive sources, right? The National Academy of Sciences, the NOAA, Columbia University. How prestigious, right? And Obama's science czar, John Holdren, he's the guy who loves forced abortions and said so. He thought that man-made global cooling caused by man's emissions of carbon dioxide were going to kill 1 billion people. Really, he did, and now he's the science czar. He rails about global warming. We'll get back to him in a minute. And his solution, just like the solution of the global cooling alarmists at the time, we need a global government, we need economic controls, we need to give up our liberty, and we need population control. So if those solutions sound familiar, good, they should, because those are the same solutions they're giving us for alleged global warming. So here is from Newsweek's article. You can take a look there at the global cooling stuff that's supposed to be coming. And of course, now we're not worried about global cooling anymore, right? Maybe we should be, actually. I've talked to some very respectable scientists with really serious credentials who've looked at this and said, actually, global cooling maybe is coming. It's not man-made, but it might be good to prepare. But anyway, so after global cooling scare, we got the global warming scare. They realized that you know, that might be more plausible. And so the ridiculous warming predictions have actually fared no better than the cooling predictions. I've tried to find predictions that they've made that have come true, and trust me, it's hard. You know, it's almost like God has a sense of humor, I tell you. You know, they say something will happen, and then the opposite happens, really. It's mind-boggling how consistent it is. So you had the alarmists such as Al Gore, NASA scientists, BBC. They all said that the Arctic was going to be ice-free by 2013. They said this in 2007. And then the NASA scientists said, maybe even that's too conservative. Maybe it's going to be before. We'll have to see. So, of course, 2013 came and went, and the Arctic is still doing just fine, right? Then Antarctica. They've been telling us for years that Antarctica was losing ice and it was causing sea level rise and blue. And this is in the UN reports. You can read it. They say the Antarctic is losing ice and it's going to raise the sea level. And then it turns out that no, that's not true. Actually, Antarctica has been gaining massive amounts of ice. Trillions of tons of ice have been gained on top of the land in Antarctica. And then the sea, we have the same thing. Actually, in recent years, we've had world records. Since records began, we have never had so much sea ice around Antarctica. It's really extraordinary. You know, they said it was going to disappear, and so God gave us record Antarctic sea ice. So here is a global warming ship. They went to go study global warming in Antarctica in the summer. They were going to show us how the ice was gone. Really, I promise it. So there they are. They got stuck in the ice. Really, really funny. And I think it's a perfect metaphor, right? They had to fly out with helicopters and all kinds of ice-breaking shit, guzzling fossil fuels, you know, hydrocarbons to save these guys. And I think they bought some carbon credits to offset their emissions. But it was really funny. Really, really funny story. And so here's really everything you need to know to understand that their theory is wrong, right? They told us that as CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere increased, warming was going to increase and accelerate. Well, that didn't happen. We have satellite data and we have weather balloon data that show we have had no observable global warming in 18 years, maybe 21 years, depending on how you look at it, 58 according to the weather balloons. And that means that every single model that the United Nations has based its predictions on was wrong. They made 73 models to calculate what was going to happen. Every single one predicted warming. Here's the average of them, that red line there. That's what was supposed to happen based on the average of UN models. Down there on the green and the blue is what the observable evidence shows us. So a monkey rolling a set of dice would have actually had a much better chance of predicting what was going to happen to temperatures than the United Nations, really. It's, and it discredits their theory. So they've come up with new theories to explain this. They're having a really tough time. But they say that the ocean ate my global warming. That's the preferred excuse right now. They say that the heat is hiding somewhere down there, and we didn't forecast this, but it really is there, trust us. And some leaked documents, we found out that the Obama administration was pressuring the UN to include this ocean ate my global warming theory in their report. So there you have it. If their theory was correct, we should have had increased warming. We didn't have increased warming, therefore their theory is incorrect. Now we have climate change, right? So, then if it gets colder, warmer, it'll always be climate change. But, this goes right, it's so simple, right? The null hypothesis is that the climate has always changed. We've always seen the climate changing, right? It has always changed. It's gotten colder, it's gotten warmer, different things have happened. And so we would expect that to continue, right? Now, if humans are having some effect on this, then the burden is on the alarmists to show that. And unfortunately for them, fortunately for us, they have not succeeded because, that's a very, very tough job. And here we have some of this evidence of climate change. That right there is a Viking church that was built in Greenland back when the Vikings were farming on Greenland. Good luck trying to farm on Greenland today. It's way too cold. So there you go. Climate change at work, climate change long before your SUV was on the road, there was climate change, right? So the Vikings eventually had to move. So the real agenda here is demonizing carbon dioxide. Now, you probably heard Obama and Al Gore and the UN talk about carbon pollution, right? It probably sounds really scary. Nobody likes pollution, and carbon sounds scary. But really, carbon dioxide is the gas of life. Talk to any scientist who knows what they're talking about, and they will tell you carbon dioxide is the gas of life. It is essential to all life on this planet. The plants need it. You exhale it. Carbon dioxide is crucial to life. Without it, everything is done. We're cooked, right? There's no more human beings, no more plants. It's over. So Earth is currently starving for CO2, right? That's why farmers who have greenhouses pump carbon dioxide in there, because plants have optimum levels of CO2, and almost all of them would like to have more carbon dioxide than we currently have in the atmosphere. They were designed to have more carbon dioxide than we currently have in the atmosphere, and we know for a fact that at past periods in the Earth's history, we've had a lot more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So, they don't want to talk about this, but they don't dispute it, because you can't dispute it. These are all facts. But we're supposed to believe that our breath, every time you exhale, you're exhaling pollution, and that we need to submit to global regulations and UN taxes on this alleged pollution. So they say that the CO2 causes the greenhouse effect. Well, what they also don't tell you is that human emissions of CO2 make up a fraction of 1% of all the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This is also indisputable. You can talk to any global warmist you want, and they will reluctantly acknowledge that human emissions of CO2 make up a fraction of 1% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Water vapor is 95%. And the rest is, different greenhouse gases. And then, of course, there's lots of CO2 that's in the atmosphere, regardless of what humans do, right? When plants decompose, when animals decompose, it comes out of the oceans, comes out of the volcanoes, comes from all kinds of sources. So human emissions of CO2 are a fraction of 1%. And, if one big volcano blew up, it could dwarf all of the carbon emissions that humans have ever put out since we were put here. So, we're expected to believe that this fraction of 1% of carbon dioxide that's, greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is driving catastrophic global warming, and we're all going to die unless we submit to global taxes and global regulation and agree that our breath is pollution. Now, frankly, I find that ridiculous. And, it's funny that it's the same solution for global cooling and all these things. So, that is the real agenda. Imagine from a bureaucrat's perspective what you could accomplish if you could convince people that everything they do, ranging from sitting on a couch and breathing, to driving a car, to producing electricity, produces this pollution that you need to pay taxes on and regulate. And that's what they're after, right? They tell us that's what they're after. So, there's no secret. They've told us they want to tax this. They want to regulate it at the global level, at the regional level. And so that is what they're after, right? And they tell us, here's a big sign. We saw lots of people carrying this sign in Paris. They want system change, not climate change. And you can ask them what they mean, and they'll tell you. They don't like capitalism. They don't like free markets. They want socialism. That's what they mean by system change. And they think that the global warming hoax will be a good tool to advance that at the global level, right? The UN should be in charge of all this. So they want to use carbon dioxide to crush national sovereignty and to empower what they call global governance. It's a little bit less intimidating maybe than global government, but they're still doing the same thing. And you know, this is standard rhetoric from, I call them the globalists, or you can call them internationalists, whatever you want, as opposed to, you know, people who believe in the nation state and you know, God created the nations, right? Well, these people don't like the nations. They want globalism. So they call it the New World Order, and they say that the global warming is a global problem, just like everything else, and therefore requires a global solution. And only the UN can give us global solutions, right? So they actually outlined this in 1991. The Club of Rome, for those of you who don't know, it's a big gathering of prominent globalists and communists. You know, Mikhail Gorbachev is there, Al Gore is there, all these bigwigs. They came together with the Club of Rome, and they put out this report. You know, as the Cold War was supposedly coming to an end, they needed a new enemy to unite humanity, right, to justify the totalitarianism and the UN scheming. So they found it. They said, in searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution and the threat of global warming and water shortages and famine would fit the bill. These dangers are caused by human intervention. And the real enemy then is humanity itself. So we're the enemy of ourselves, right? And only the UN can save us. So it's wonderful how that works. So if humanity is the enemy of the earth and of humanity, well, then we need some people to come and save us from this enemy. And that's why we need to surrender our sovereignty and our liberty and our money to the United Nations and to our governments and to these regional governments that they're building and empowering under the guise of the climate hoax. And in this UN Paris Agreement, and it is a treaty, make no mistake, regardless of whether Obama calls it a treaty or presents it to the Senate, it is still a treaty. It says shall, I forget how many times now, 20-something times. So these are obligations being imposed on us under this UN treaty. And basically, they are bringing together this global system. Now, of course, they didn't get everything they wanted. If you want to learn more about the Paris Agreement, you can read all about it in here. We have a number of the things that I'm talking about now you'll read about in here, actually, the exposing the global warming hoax, the pseudoscience, the Paris Agreement. We'll talk about Agenda 2030. We have a big article about it in here. So if this is a subject that's interesting for you, be sure to pick up a copy of this. And actually there's a lot of quotes from these people. I've only chosen a select few because of time constraints, but I just want to let you guys hear it from, you know, the reason I use so many quotes is not because I like to hear what these people have to say. It's because I want you guys to hear it straight from the horse's mouth, right? You don't know me. You have no reason to believe me, but, you know, maybe you can believe them. So here's the chairwoman of the UNFCCC, which is the UN Framework Climate Change Convention, or Convention on Climate Change. So she's been running these UN global warming summits in recent years, and she said this in Doha in 2012, it must be understood that what is occurring here in the whole climate change process is a complete transformation of the economic structure of the world. So system change, right? Complete transformation. Obama talks about a fundamental transformation too. This is at the global level, right? It's not just fundamental transformation of America. This is of the whole world. These guys are ambitious. And because every economic activity produces CO2, again, just sitting, you know, all of you guys are emitting CO2 right there. So basically everything needs to be controlled under the guise of dealing with this supposed problem. Here's some more. So governments need to decide what kind of energy we're going to use, if we're going to be allowed any, right? No nuclear power, no hydrocarbons, so maybe we're going to power it all on unicorn poots and rainbows, who knows. But they talk about carbon budgets for individuals and for nations, right? So nations are going to get carbon budgets and individuals will get carbon budgets. After you've used up your carbon budget, then you're in trouble, right? Because again, breathing emits CO2, so then that's a big problem. But here's the Prime Minister of India, and to his credit, he said, you know what, I don't care what you guys say, I'm going to build lots of power plants because my people need energy. But he also said that justice demands that with what little carbon we can still safely burn, developing countries are allowed to grow. So what happens if America can't burn any more carbon, or carbon dioxide, the gas of life? Well, it's not a pretty picture, you know, we can put it that way. Here's another guy, Ottmar Edenhofer. He was the co-chair of the UN IPCC working group, and he was a lead author. The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These are the pseudoscientists running the UN's climate science. And he says, one must say clearly that we redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. One has to free oneself from the illusion that international climate policy is environmental policy. This has almost nothing to do with environmental policy anymore. So, they tell us they're saving the environment, but then at the same time, they tell us this has almost nothing to do with the environment. It has to do with redistributing your wealth to third world dictators, right?